Hey friends, my name is C and welcome to a new video for IGCSE Geography, and today we have 2.5 for Climate and Natural Vegetation for Theme 2 of the syllabus. So here's specification from the website, and in this video we have two case studies which are an area of tropical rainforest and an area of hot desert. And we'll start with climate, the equatorial climate. So here we have some key notes for this equatorial climate. So tropical areas, for example the Amazon rainforest or the Borneo Rainforest, has an equatorial climate, and all areas of the tropical climate are found within 10 degrees of the equator. So this is the equator, so this is the globe, the earth, and let's say the equator is here down the middle, so 10 degrees north and 10 degrees south. So all areas of the tropical climate are found within this 10 degrees right here. And here are some notes on the equatorial climate. So equatorial climate has a low air pressure. This means that water is able to evaporate, and this causes rain and humid all year round. So one way to think about this is that imagine you're on the ground right here. So imagine, and there are some basically water in the air. So if it were to be a very high pressure, think of it as the water cannot evaporate, and this cannot form clouds. Whereas if it were to be low pressure, this means that the water is able to evaporate and form clouds, which means that it'll rain. So that's low air pressure versus high air pressure. And here are characteristics of an equatorial climate. For example, it's warm and it's humid, and there's high levels of rainfall due to convectional rainfall, and the water vapor is able to condensate at the dew point. And there's no season at equatorial climate, and there's a low atmospheric pressure, as mentioned, the low air pressure, and there's light winds. So this is an important note of why it rains or where it rains. So this thing called the Intertropical Convergence Zone, or the IGCSE, is a band of low pressure around the Earth, the low pressure zone around the Earth. And it is a point at which the sun is shining directly on the Earth's surface, and it has low pressure. And this means that because it has low pressure, this means that wherever the IGCSE is, there will be high sunshine and high rainfall. So at one part of the year, the IGCSE might be right at the equator, so there will be high rainfall and high sunshine. Whereas other parts of the year, it may be up here. So up here has high rainfall and has high sunshine, and another part of the year, it may be down here. And this basically forms seasons, like summer season. Then we have factors affecting climate. So as you saw in the previous slide how factors affect the climate, here's a more detailed view of the factors. So here we have 7 different factors. So number 1, we have the distance to the sea. And because water heats up more slowly due to the high heat capacity of water, this means that water takes up and releases heat more slowly. And this contributes to warmer winter and colder summer. And then we have ocean currents. Warm currents from the equatorial regions raise the temperature of polar areas, and cold currents from polar areas decrease the temperature of equatorial regions. And then we have altitude, as we know that the air temperature generally decreases with increasing altitude due to thinner air. That's why in the top of the mountain there's a lower temperature than on the earth, on like the sea level. And then winds. So we have 2 different types of wind. We have the prevailing wind from inland and the prevailing wind from the sea. And from inland, it will lower winter temperatures and raise summer temperatures, whereas from the sea, it will raise winter temperatures and lower summer temperatures. And then we have cloud cover, where a high cloud cover absorbs the radiation from the sun, which is quite obvious. And then there's pressure, where a low pressure produces rain as the water vapor may evaporate, as mentioned in the previous slide, which will form convectional rainfall. And then we have tropical rainforest. So here's a definition of tropical rainforest. It's dense forest usually found on or near the equator where the climate is hot and wet. And there are many major tropical rainforests, for example the Amazon rainforest in Brazil and the Borneo Rainforest in the Borneo Island, which will look more into this in the coming slides for the case study. And one quick note to know is that the tropical rainforests are always under threat from human activities due to farming and logging. So here we have the tropical rainforest, the structure, and we'll look into the structure right now. So the rainforest is basically generally divided into 4 layers due to availability of sunlight. So we have the emergence layer, the canopy, the undercanopy, and the shrub layer. So trees in the tallest emergent layer and the canopy layer receive the most sunlight because they are basically the tallest, right? And they receive the most sunlight, so therefore they grow the tallest. And below the canopy, in the undercanopy and in the shrub layer, there's not much sunlight, so the trees or the vegetation there needs to compete for sunlight, so they want to grow taller or higher. So they might adapt due to that different circumstance. For example, we have some woody vines that climb up the trees to reach sunlight, or some trees that have buttress root or arrow roots which are above the ground to collect water. And for some animal adaptations, there may be some animals that are camouflaged to hide from predators in these layers right here. And there are some animals like sloths that have strong claws and grips, and this helps them to climb up the trees as well as to catch prey. Then we have more notes on the vegetation, animals and soils in rainforests. Starting with vegetation. So the vegetation in tropical rainforests is evergreen, which means that they are always blooming in the rainforest, and this is because there's an abundance of sunlight and desirable conditions in rainforests. For example, as I mentioned, high sunlight, lots of water, and good temperature. And some species have to adapt to their conditions. For example, leaves closer to the bottom have a darker pigment, so they have more chloroplasts to photosynthesize at a low light level. Because as I mentioned in the previous slide, the trees or the leaves down here don't get much sunlight, so they need more chloroplasts in the leaf, so they are darker, which means that they can carry out photosynthesis. Whereas the leaves in the emergent layer or the canopy layer don't need that much chloroplast because they receive a lot of sunlight already, so they don't need extra pigment, extra chloroplast to produce photosynthesis or to carry out photosynthesis. And then we have some trees have drip-tipped leaves to get rid of excess moisture. So what this is that, let's say you have a normal leaf right here, right? Which is like a normal leaf, quite a big leaf. Whereas drip-tipped leaves are basically leaves with a sharp tip, like this right here. Oops, this is a very drip tip. So when there's any extra water gathered on the surface, it can basically drip down from the drip tip. And here are some notes on the animals. So tropical rainforests have a very high animal biodiversity because it has abundance of nutrients and, as I mentioned, favorable climate. And apex carnivores, basically the carnivores in the top of the food chain, for example tigers, are highly camouflaged, and prey are camouflaged too to avoid getting caught by the predators. And here's some more notes on the soil of the rainforest. They are not very fertile, and rainforest soil are often red in color as it is rich in iron. So basically there's a thin layer of fertile soil on the surface where dead leaves and biomass decompose, and these are very fertile. But because there's a high rainfall rate in the rainforest, these rich and fertile soil get washed away by the rain, and this is called leaching. And then we have deforestation happening in the rainforest. So here are some benefits about rainforests. About 200 million people live near rainforests, as they provide lots of benefits to people who live near it. For example, as farming, tourism, or supply. And rainforests also regulate the world's climate. However, deforestation happens around the world, for example in Brazil in the Amazon rainforest, and this disrupts the circulation and storage of nutrients, and it also causes loss of biodiversity as some animals live in the trees. So basically what's good about the rainforest will be reversed by deforestation. And deforestation also causes soil erosion as no roots from the trees are present to hold the soil together, and this causes extra leaching when heavy rainfall pours. So to understand why this happens is that imagine you have soil right here, and you have trees. So you have trees right here, and that's basically its roots, right? So the roots, and you have basically the leaves right here. So imagine you have this tree right here and the roots. So the roots are basically extend on, into the soil, into the ground, right? So this in a way holds the soil together. So this makes the soil more, basically hold it together and to make it more quote unquote stable, right? But if deforestation were to happen and the tree weren't there, so let's say if it's just down here where there's no roots at all, the soil is not very stable as it is not held together by roots. So as rainfall comes in, everything will get washed away by the rain, which causes extra leaching, because there's leaching already from the start, as we saw in the previous slide. And for example, in Brazil, agricultural colonization by landless migrants along highways and agricultural growth areas accelerated the rate of deforestation. And there are also mining happening in the southeastern Amazonia, which is called this project right here. And also rainforests are cleared to build hydroelectric power schemes, HEP, such as this dam right here in this river. Then we'll look at the case study, which is an area of tropical rainforest, which will look at the Borneo Rainforest. So here's a quick note. The Borneo Rainforest is a rainforest that is in the Borneo Island that stretches across 3 countries, in Malaysia, Indonesia, and Brunei. And it has an area of approximately 430,000 kilometers squared. So here's the location right here. We have Malaysia, Indonesia, and the Borneo Islands down here. So that's where the Borneo Rainforest is. So here are some notes on deforestation in the Borneo Rainforest. It's happening due to multiple reasons. For example, logging, where there's very intense logging happening there with an extraction of over 240 meter cube per hectare, compared to Amazon at 23 meter cube per hectare averagely. And plantations, the rainforest is being cleared for oil palm, not pill, sorry, palm oil or oil palm, for oil palm plantations. And it is said that 86% of the deforestation in Malaysia between these years was for oil palm plantations. And as we saw just now in Brazil, there's also mining happening in the Borneo Rainforest, where the east and south of Kalimantan are facing threats from large-scale coal mining. And here are the impacts of deforestation. Number 1, we have climate change. Because the rainforest, as you said, is very important to regulate the global temperature, and it is said to absorb over 30% of the CO2 produced in Malaysia, deforestation basically affects the climate as more CO2 is released into the atmosphere, thereby contributing to the enhanced greenhouse effect. And there's also a loss of biodiversity, as the rainforests house a variety of organisms, which means that if deforestation were to happen, these organisms or animals wouldn't have a house, so their habitats are being destroyed. And this is seen where the population of orangutan in Borneo fell over 130,000 in the last 50 years. And last point, as I mentioned just now, deforestation will affect soil fertility and soil erosion, and basically it will cause leaching, as I mentioned. And then we have the management of these deforestation. So we have the Forest Stewardship Council of the FSC, and it's established in 1993, and it is an international non-governmental organization dedicated to promoting responsible management of the world's forests. And from 2008 and 2018, the Borneo Initiative turned 3 million hectares of tropical rainforest into sustainably managed FSC certified forest concessions. And there's also the Danang Valley Conservation Area, the DVCA, that is basically a conservation area that basically conserves like the local environment. Then we will move on to desert, the climate. So deserts have a hot desert climate, and they are basically found between 15 degrees to 30 degrees on the western side of continents due to trade winds and ocean currents. So it's quite interesting how deserts are formed in the mostly west side of continents. So for example, we have the world map right here, and let's say we have the Americas right here, and let's say Africa's down here. So Africa's down here, right? So we'll just focus on Africa. deserts are usually found on the west coast. For example, this part right here, like which we'll look into later, the Namib Desert. So here are characteristics of hot desert climate. They have hot days and cold nights. So there's a high temperature range between hot during the day and during the night, right? And this is called a high diurnal range. There's low rainfall due to high pressure. So this forms little clouds, and this means that the desert doesn't really rain, so it has a dry climate. And it has long days, so there's long hours of sunshine. And due to temperature lag, the hottest months in the deserts are a month after the sun is directly overhead, as the ground retains the heat built up over time. Because why this happens is that the sand will absorb the heat. So during summer, it will basically absorb the heat and it will get really hot. So after summer happens, it will be autumn, right? Where it's basically meant to be colder. But in this period of time, the sand will release the heat, which means that it's basically temperature lag where the sand releases the heat, which will form a more hotter environment. And then we have more notes on the different climates. Different areas of deserts have different climates due to these influences. For example, the altitude, the distance from the ocean, and cold ocean currents, which will affect their temperature. Then we have more notes. Water in the ocean heats and cools at a very slow rate, and because of this, it means that winters along the coast tend to be warmer as heat gets released from the water, and summer tends to be a little colder than inland. So here's a summary of the hot desert climate. The hot desert climate is hot and dry due to high air pressures, forming very little clouds at the dew point. There's low rainfall, and the sun's rays are hitting the surface at a high angle, so this means that it will be hotter. So more on this one right here actually. So let's say we have the ground right here, and we have two scenarios where the sun is basically very on the side, and the sun's directly on top. And there are, let's say, just one or two clouds, right? So if the sun were to shine from the top, it will directly reach the ground, which means that it will be hot, right? Whereas if it were to hit from the side, it will go through clouds, more clouds, and it will take a longer path, which means that it will be not as hot, and the angle will be very small. Whereas here the angle will be very high, and the angle here will be very small, like so. And here's more notes on hot deserts. And as I mentioned, the desert is basically a dry area with limited vegetation, and they can be either hot or cold. Because the definition for desert is that it has irregular rainfall of less than 250 mm per year. So hot deserts are basically the deserts that you know, for example, the Sahara Desert or the Namib Desert. Whereas cold desert is, for example, the Antarctica, because it has irregular rainfall of less than 250 mm per year. So cold deserts is, for example, the Antarctica. And hot deserts are typically found in the subtropical areas between 20 degree and 30 degree north and south of the equator. And they are typically found on the western side of continents, as I mentioned. And as I mentioned, the Antarctic Desert right here. And then we have more notes on the vegetation and animals in hot deserts. So there are two main types of desert plant. We have this first type right here, and these are plants that grow over a number of years and they store a lot of water, for example cactus. Whereas the other type are plants that live for a short period of time, but they form a dense covering of vegetation immediately after the rain. And as I mentioned, in the rainforest where plants adapt, they also adapt in deserts, where they have to adapt to the low rainfall to minimize water loss. So for example, they have thick waxy cuticle to reduce water loss on the surface of the water. And they also have large stems to store water, for example in cactus where they have large stems. And they also have widespread root systems to search for water underground. So the roots can basically go into the ground to search for water. And building onto the thick waxy cuticle on the leaves, these leaves have reduced surface area to reduce transpiration, which is basically water evaporating. And similar to the vegetation, the animals have also adapted to the hot desert climate, where they are nocturnal, and they have large ears to reduce body heat. and they have humps to store food and the white feet to spread weight to make it easier to walk across the sand or the desert. So lastly, we have a case study on an area of hot desert, and we'll look at the Namib Desert. So we have this diagram right here. We have Africa and the Namib Desert right here. And the Namib Desert is the only coastal desert in the world, and it stretches across Namibia in southwestern Africa with a land surface area of approximately 81,000 kilometers squared. And this is what's happening in the Namib Desert. There's mining happening. So here's more notes on mining that's happening in Namib Desert. So diamond and uranium mining occur in the southwest coast of Namib Desert at this place right here, which obviously destroys the desert. However, these mined goods accounted for more than 50% of Namibia's export earnings. So in one hand, it destroys the desert and the environment, but on the other hand, it actually builds, or like actually is how the country receives its earnings. And the mines in the Namib Desert are open pit mines, which means that the goods are mined from an open pit in the ground. This means that a lot of animal habitats are destroyed in the process, which has a risk of forming sinkholes, as you can see in these two examples in Namibia. And the Namibian Uranium Association, or the NUA, is an independent association representing the operating uranium mines and the exploration. And they are basically a way, or like the management, in which how Namibia is mining the uranium and basically carrying out sustainable practices when they carry out the mining. And lastly, we have farming and tourism in the Namib Desert. So as we know, farming is difficult in the deserts as there is lack of fresh water or even water at all. So authorities have set up an irrigation system at the Namib Desert to promote farming, or to allow farming. So as you can see here, Namibia has 5 rivers with continuous flow. So it has this leads to a good area of irrigated farmland. And the irrigation system set up by the government or the authorities is called the Hadap Irrigation Scheme. And basically they set up the dam that has been crucial to local people, which provides lots of water for irrigation and for farming. And because of this dam, there is irrigation system, which leads to crops like alfalfa and dates that are grown in the Namib Desert, which benefits the local people. And lastly, tourism. The use of motor and quad bikes near the bay proved to be doing damage to the vegetation and animals in the area, because these motor or quad bikes basically will destroy the desert, which will destroy local vegetation and animals habitats. And because of this, the breeding of beetles and reptiles on the steep dune faces is affected. And another example of tourism, the Equatorial National Park is set up in Namibia, and it promotes ecotourism, which are basically tourism that adhere to eco or sustainable practices. And it has an area more than 22,000 kilometers squared, and this park basically has almost every large African animal species which will attract a lot of tourists. For example, there's lions, giraffes, and rhinoceros in the Equatorial National Park. And that's it for this video. And that's it for this video on climate and natural vegetation. And I hope you'll enjoy this video. And if you need any more learning resources or any teaching resources, you can check out my website in the description, or you can type it out in your browser at www.MakesItEasy.com. And I hope you'll enjoy this video, and I'll see you all in the next video. Here's to learning made easy.